Larsen, and I'm going to talk about how we can change the cannabis laws in British Columbia. I'm not going to talk so much about the medicinal benefits of cannabis and the wide range of therapeutic uses. I'm going to assume you already know about that. I'm not going to talk so much about industrial hemp and the many ways that the cannabis plant could help our economy and could help our environment and our industry. And I'm not really even going to touch so much about the harms of prohibition and the great damage that these laws cause to our society and to our people. I'm going to talk about how we can change the laws in British Columbia. And so first I want to explain who I am and what I'm doing here and where our movement has come over the last 20 years or so. I got involved in this when I was a university student, and I started a club at my Simon Fraser University called the League for Ethical Action on Drugs. And after I graduated from university, I went to work for Mark Emery, the Prince of Pot, who's now sitting in a prison in Yazoo, Mississippi for selling cannabis seeds by mail order and really for funding the marijuana movement for many years. During that time, I was editor of Cannabis Culture Magazine for 10 years, and I had the chance to learn a lot about cannabis and the culture and history and politics that surround it. In 2000 and 2001, I helped to form the Canadian Marijuana Party and then the BC Marijuana Party, and I ran as a candidate in both of those elections. And in 2003, I joined the NDP, and I created a group called End to Prohibition that works within the NDP to develop better cannabis policies and better drug policies in general. In 2005, I opened the Vancouver Seed Bank after Mark had been raided and wasn't able to sell cannabis seeds anymore. And in 2008, I opened the Vancouver Medicinal Cannabis Dispensary. And we now serve over 4,000 patients in Vancouver and actually across Canada by mail order as well. And in all this time, people have often said to me, Dana, what are you getting so worked up over? It's just a matter of time till these laws change. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And I disagree very greatly with that idea, because it's not just a matter of time. This kind of change is not inevitable, and there's no reason these laws couldn't persist for generations longer. It's really a matter of hard work and effort, sacrifice, time, money, energy, all those things that have to be put into place in order to actually change these laws. And I feel in some ways that where we are now is reminiscent of the 1970s. In the 1970s, there was head shops and cannabis books and information all across the country. There was many American states were voting to decriminalize cannabis possession and start to change the laws. In Canada, we had Pierre Trudeau and Joe Clark, Liberal and Conservative prime ministers, both saying it was time to change the marijuana laws. And in the US, we had Jimmy Carter, the president there, saying it was time to reform the marijuana laws. And yet a whole generation has gone by since then, and in many ways these laws have only gotten worse and worse, so it's not inevitable at all. And yet over the last 20 years, we've actually had a lot of successes in the cannabis movement. 2 decades ago, no hemp was being grown in Canada. Now hemp is quite widely grown, and you can get hemp seed food products and even hemp clothing readily available. It should be grown more, and it's still tied down pretty tightly with red tape, and we should be subsidizing and building on our cannabis industry, but nevertheless, hemp is growing across our country. That's a great thing. Bongs and pipes and harm reduction instruments like that are also widely available. Even though those laws are still on the books, you don't have to take an old Coke can and punch some holes in it to make a homemade pipe anymore. You can use a clean, sterile, healthy glass pipe or a vaporizer or any of the other forms that are out there now, very widely available. And books and information about cannabis is also widely available, even though those laws are also on the books and are still in force. You can find out how to grow quality cannabis, how to use it safely, how to tailor what you produce and what you use for your own medical needs. And so we've had a lot of positive changes. Cannabis seeds are also widely available, even though those laws remain in force. Certainly in a big city you can get access to these things. The more rural, the more north you are, the more of a challenge you're going to have, the more you're likely to get harassed by the RCMP. And medical cannabis is also widely available in Canada. The government's actually growing marijuana. Admittedly kind of low quality, swaggy stuff, but hey, at least they're growing some cannabis. It's a step in the right direction. And we also have a wide access to medical cannabis through dispensaries all across our country as well. And even though some of them get raided sometimes, for the most part, especially in big cities, there's a pretty entrenched system of dispensaries now serving tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of patients across the country. And yet for most of these things, aside from the change to allow hemp cultivation, the rest of it, the law hasn't really changed. The laws have stayed on the books. It's merely the laws are not being enforced so much in bigger cities especially, but these laws remain on the books. And to change these laws, I look to our American cousins down in the south there and how they've changed their cannabis laws. And we know about Washington and Colorado that recently voted to legalize marijuana at the state level in slightly different ways. At the same time as that happened, Massachusetts became the 18th state to legalize medical access to cannabis. That's an average of more than 1 year since California became the first state to have a referendum to legalize medical cannabis in 1996. And in every one of those cases where the American states voted to change the marijuana laws, it was against the will of their governments. They passed it despite their governors and their legislatures being opposed to it. It was never a top-down process. It was always the people getting together, writing their own law, getting the signatures, and getting on the ballot to push it into force. Now, in British Columbia, we are the only province in Canada that has a referendum system like that. Ours is actually harder to get something on the ballot here in BC than in any American state, and in fact any referendum system around the world that I know of. There's a higher threshold, a higher number of signatures that we need to get something on the ballot here in British Columbia. But the campaign against the HST showed us that it can be done, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. So what we did is I got together with a fellow named Kirk Tucson. Kirk's a brilliant lawyer. He's won us many major constitutional battles in the courts to help protect and expand medical access to cannabis and help to curb some of the excesses of the federal government's war on marijuana. And Kirk and I got together and we tried to write a piece of legislation that would allow us to decriminalize cannabis at the provincial level and start us on the path towards a legally regulated exemption from the federal cannabis laws. And that's entirely within the power of the federal government. The Minister of Health can exempt any person or any class of persons from any aspect of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act for the public good, for public safety, or for public health. So there's plenty of opportunity there for them to allow us to change the laws in British Columbia just as a province. And you know, when we had alcohol prohibition, each province themselves decided whether they wanted to enter into that or not. In Quebec, Quebec was the last province in and the first province out of alcohol prohibition. And that's why until fairly recently you couldn't bring alcohol across provincial borders. That dated back to the time when we had alcohol prohibition and each province had their own laws. And they can still do that now. Each province has jurisdiction over alcohol and tobacco, and if cannabis was taken out of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, it would also fall under provincial jurisdiction. Age limits, points of sale, taxation rates, labeling, how we deal with medical use, all those questions would be dealt with by the provincial government. And so along with demanding the federal government change the law or let BC go our own way, this legislation also sets up a provincial commission. And this commission would be mandated to figure out what the laws and rules and regulations around legal marijuana are going to be, to answer all those questions. And they would have hearings and talk to experts and talk to the public and do some research and come up with a proposed set of rules and regulations that we could put into place. So that when the federal government does say yes, when they change those laws for us, we have a system in place to go with. We're not then scrambling to figure out what it's going to be. We want to shift the debate from whether or not we should change the cannabis laws to what are we going to change them to? What are the new laws going to be? Let's figure that stuff out. So this legislation would tell police to lay off cannabis users, would treat minors in possession of cannabis the same as if it was alcohol, would call upon the federal government to change the cannabis laws and let BC go its own way, and then set up a commission to figure out what the details around legal cannabis are going to be in British Columbia. But how do we get this law passed? How do we get it on the books? Well, I talked about the referendum system, and certainly that would be great. We could also lobby our provincial government. There's no reason Christy Clark couldn't pass this law tomorrow. There's no reason that if the polls are accurate and Adrian Dix becomes our next premier, there's no reason he couldn't pass this law right away either. And we should certainly be calling upon our governments, pressuring our MLAs, not letting them get away with saying, well, it's a federal issue and I can't really do anything. We've shown that's not the case. And I'll add that by submitting our referendum to Elections BC and having them approve it, that means that they've agreed this is within provincial jurisdiction. We actually tried to submit some other versions of this law that would allow people to have home cultivation and create some rules and regulations around it. They said, no, you can't do that. You can't make rules and regulations around illegal activity and then that's not within your jurisdiction. But you can tell the police where to set their priorities. And they agreed that this legislation is valid, suitable for a referendum. And so next time Christy Clark or Adrian or anyone else says we can't pass this, it's not provincial jurisdiction, they're wrong. Their own government lawyers at Elections BC have proven this isn't the case. So, although I would love it if our leaders would pass this law, I don't have a lot of faith in our political leaders to make this happen. In the US, like I said, it's never been a state government, it's always been the people, often against the will of their state governments. So how do we have a referendum in British Columbia? To have a referendum in our province, to have a vote, we need to collect 10% of the registered voters. We need to get signatures from 10% of the registered voters in every single one of British Columbia's 85 electoral districts. And we have to do that in a 90-day period. We only have 3 months to collect all those signatures. It comes to over 400,000 people that have to sign on board. And they have to do it, like I said, in a 3-month period. So that's a very difficult challenge. So what we did is we submitted our legislation to Elections BC. They said, hey, it looks good to us. You can start that 90 days now in late November. And we said, okay, that's fine, but now we're going to withdraw that legislation because although I know we have the support out there, I know we have far, far more than 10% of registered voters in every riding on board. What we lack is infrastructure. We lack volunteers. We lack people. We lack awareness of what we're trying to do. We've got to build up bigger numbers, put our volunteers in place, put our structures in place, and pre-register people. Over the next 10 months, my purpose of this tour is to educate people about this campaign and to get people pre-registered so that when we come to September 2013 and we refile with Elections BC at that point and we start that clock again next year from September, October, November 2013. At that point, hopefully, we've already got 400,000 people pre-registered across the province. We've got thousands of volunteers in place that are ready to go, that have already signed up a lot of people. And we can tell those volunteers when that time comes, here's the 100 people in your neighborhood who have already signed and registered, who want to sign this form, get them to sign the official thing. That way you don't have to go knocking on random doors next September. We do all that stuff in advance, so we have a big head start. And if we do that, and if we push hard enough over the next 10 months, then I believe we can get the signatures that we need come next September. Now, the referendum system has fixed election dates. They're separate from our provincial elections, separate from municipal elections. It's its own system. And we're supposed to have a referendum every 3 years in September on all the things that everybody got signatures for. But because it's so incredibly hard to get signatures, we never have referendums. But the next one is scheduled for September 2014. So whether we had the signatures today or next year, the referendum would still happen in September 2014. So there's not a rush in terms of getting them now, but although there's 10 months ahead, it might seem like a long time, that 10 months is going to go by very quickly. And so our goal is to get this law passed. And I tell you that casting that ballot in September 2014 to legalize marijuana in British Columbia will be the best vote that I ever cast. Absolutely. And I hope that you feel the same way. And you know, I've got a daughter who's 14 years old. She'll be 15 in a couple of weeks. And I know many of us here have got kids or grandkids. And I like to imagine that my daughter's children will be able to grow up in a world where all of this stuff is in the past. And I like to imagine, and I want you to imagine this with me in the future when you're there with your grandchildren or great-grandchildren and they're getting ready for school and they're reading their history book. And they turn to you and they say, Grandma, Grandpa, is it true that I'm reading here that when you were a kid that cannabis hemp was illegal and people would go to jail for growing this plant, but I know our house is built out of hemp fiber, and I know that the bus that takes me to school runs on hemp fuel, and I know that we had hemp seed granola for breakfast, and I know that you use medical cannabis to help treat the aches and pains of being a senior citizen, so how is it that people used to go to jail for growing this plant? And I want you to be able to say, you know what, people did used to go, and our prisons were filled with people who grew this plant. But when the Sensible BC campaign came to my town, I got involved and I made a difference. And I worked my ass off and I gathered signatures and I talked to people and I made sure that that law passed so that you would never have to know what it's like to be harassed or arrested for what herbal medicine you use or for what plants you choose to grow in your garden. That's the future that I imagine for myself and for my children. Let's not have to tell our grandkids, yeah, sorry, we didn't get it done. I'm sorry, there's now a mandatory minimum for smoking a joint and you're going to go to jail for 6 months for possession. Let's not have that be the nightmare future. Because, you know, none of us here, the oldest people here, have never lived at a time when cannabis is legal. These laws have been around longer than all of us have been alive. And sometimes it almost seems normal that cannabis is illegal, like it's the way it's supposed to be. But I tell you it's not. It's terribly abnormal. And when we change these laws, when we look back on this time in history, we will see the incredible harm and damage that cannabis prohibition and the drug war has done to so many facets of our society, and so many ways that these things cause great harm. We can end that over the next couple of years. I've been doing this a long time. People have often said, oh, it's going to happen any day now. It's going to be just a few more years. And I've always thought I'll be lucky to see it happen in my lifetime. But really, for now, for the first time, I can see a path from where we are now to where we want to be. and the votes in Washington and Colorado, the incredible support from the Union of BC Municipalities, all the cities and towns in British Columbia coming on board, the former mayors and attorney generals, political leaders from both sides of the spectrum, from both caucuses are coming out for this. There's very broad support for this in British Columbia. We can get over the top. Let's not let it be like the 1970s when everybody thought it was going to happen and nothing happened and things only got worse. Let's change these laws now. We can do it in the next couple of years. I hope you will join me in this effort. I hope you'll grab some of our information, especially the sign-up sheets in the back that have got the paperclip on it. It's got a lot of information about how you can help, what you can do online, what you can do in your community, how you can get involved. What I want people to do is to register your friends and family, sign up people, talk to people about it. Get them to fill out, go online and fill out, or fill out the piece of paper. You can mail that back to us. It's got the information on the bottom. You can scan it, send it by email. You can type them in yourself and send us the information. But we need to register 400,000 or more people all around the province to make this work, to make this dream come true. I believe we can do that. We've got incredible support around this province. But we can't do it all myself. We need motivated, dedicated people volunteering their time and energy in all the communities in British Columbia. And everywhere I've gone, the 30-odd cities I've been to so far, I've always sent people away with these sign-up forms and a gleam in their eye that they're going to get involved and make a difference. So I hope you'll join me in this effort. I'm happy to answer any questions about this campaign or just about marijuana and cannabis and medical cannabis or how Mark Emery's doing or whatever you want to know. But thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your attendance. Together we can change these laws and we will do it, you and I together. Thank you very much.
You said 2014.
That's right. We will be collecting the signatures in September of 2013. That 90-day period starts then. If we succeed, the referendum will be held in September 2014. So that's the process. We'd have another year. The government of the day could say we're going to have it earlier if they wanted to, but under the legislation, that's the way it's structured. So they'd have no choice but to do it then ultimately.
And can municipalities also suggest to police forces that?
They can, and you know, we just signed a new contract with the RCMP, and Shirley Bond, our Attorney General, said over and over again, this new contract gives the cities and municipalities of British Columbia far more power over their policing to control spending and to set priorities, and it gives the province more power to do that. And so, absolutely, I would love it if more municipalities would start, and they've already endorsed decriminalization, moving to legalization, all the Union of BC municipalities, and they haven't endorsed that specifically, but that hadn't really launched. We were just getting going when they did that, right? But I've had, at every event, usually there's at least one city councillor that shows up. I don't know if we have any city councillors here today, maybe not. But usually I get a couple coming to some of our events anyways. And there's absolutely a lot of municipal support. And part of our campaign in January will be reaching out to all the municipalities, sending them all a package about this, and hopefully getting more endorsements and support for this effort. Yeah, Nikki?
Well, regarding the mayor and city council, the mayor still believes everything the RCMP tells you here, so they're kind of out to lunch. However, the next federal election should be May of 2014, so this Harper...
No, it's going to, I believe the next federal election is in 2015. I believe it's in 2015, it'll be in the, I think it'll be in the fall. But the timing for that, although for those of us who want to see a change in federal government, that could seem a long way. In terms of the timing of this, if we're successful, we have the vote in 2014, late 2014, September. The law will come into force in early 2015, take them a little while to pass it. So in early 2015, cannabis possession would be decriminalized. This commission would then start within the spring of 2015. And so it would be very difficult for the federal conservatives to to attack this or deal with this because they really want to win votes in British Columbia. If we win a referendum on this, even people who aren't really into cannabis will say, look, we had a referendum, you should do what we voted for, right? I think it will galvanize support broader than that. Even if you're not passionate about it, look, they had a referendum, let's do it, right? So I think it'll be hard for Stephen Harper to campaign against that. It'll make sure that this is a big issue in the next federal election, and I'm sure other provinces will also want to come on board once they see the success that we're having here in British Columbia. Okay, but if we change the federal government in late 2015, then we have a very good chance, whatever the government that replaces them, whether it's the NDP or the Liberals or some amalgamation or who knows what, but they all have better cannabis policies. And it'll be easiest for the Prime Minister just to say, They had a referendum in BC, we'll let them try something different, but not to impose it on other provinces or to legalize across the whole country. I think it'll be easier for them just to let BC go their own way. Other provinces will come and follow, but I think that's the easiest path for it to all happen than to have them try to do it across the whole country at once, because some areas there's less support than others and that, but nobody in Alberta, Saskatchewan should complain too much if BC does our own thing.
Well, actually, my original question was to be, how does Health Canada feel about this? I heard rumor that you and Paul Hunt from the Green Cross and Leona Aglukat, the health minister, got together.
I've never met Leona Aglukat.
Oh, okay.
I have very little interest in working with Health Canada or in any of that stuff. I'm glad others do. I'm part of a group called the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries, and that group is made up of dispensary operators and people across the country who are trying to set up a set of protocols and standards so we can certify dispensaries and create kind of a network that are more solid together, and that we can define what a dispensary should be and what the protocols they should use to operate, and try to make sure everyone's living up to that. But Health Canada is no friend to dispensaries. I've qualified for a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence, as do all of my employees under the new laws, which came into force on the same day that Washington and Colorado passed their laws. It's 2 years for me because we traffic in cannabis to minors. There's not a lot of them, but we have minors at our dispensary of parental permission and doctor's recommendation to use cannabis, but they may not be part of the government program, and the mandatory minimum for trafficking to a minor is 2 years in prison. Even without that, I would suffer a year in prison under these laws, because we sell over 3 kilos of cannabis we have over 3 kilos in our safes and in our office and that for sale. And the 3 kilo limit also comes in. Not just me, but all dispensary operators. So I haven't, CAMCD has had some meetings with Health Canada people. I don't think Leona herself, I wasn't in on those because I just don't have time for that kind of stuff. Yeah. But Health Canada is going to be bringing in new rules in 2014. They're looking to bring in new rules, which they haven't fully explained yet, but it looks like what they want to do is get rid of all the home cultivation, get rid of all the designated growers. They want to replace that with a centralized system with 5 or 6 big companies, each growing perhaps 5 or 6 strains, which will be made available to patients by mail order. That's, I think, what they want to set up. And they hope that will then, having 30 strains from this competitive market within a monopoly, that judges will then say, hey, that looks pretty good. That seems to meet the constitutional standard, and so yeah, you can shut down home grows, and if you're ready to dispensary, we won't protect them anymore, because we only exist by virtue of the federal program being so crappy that judges say that thing doesn't work at all. Patients have a right to medicine, therefore what you're doing is constitutionally protected. Well, once there's a federal program that works, we're not protected anymore.
No, obviously, but if they're going to hire prairie plant systems again, which they do, which screwed up in the coal mine 10 years ago, there's, nobody's going to buy their crap anyways.
Well, I agree with that, absolutely. And also they're not allowing patients to buy extracts or lotions and creams or foods. Kirk Tusaw recently won a court case in Victoria about extracts and that, and the result of which is patients can now make their own, just like they could grow their own cannabis. But that should be allowed, but for the vast majority of patients, it's hard enough to grow medical grade cannabis, and then to make extracts and other things out of it as well is not how it should be. And at a dispensary, you're able to access capsules, food products, tinctures, lotions, creams. We have an amazing topical cream called Arthritis Cream that works incredibly for arthritis, but also for eczema, psoriasis, for cuts and wounds and scrapes, for post-surgical pain, for muscle tension and muscle pain. This incredible medicine. And that kind of product, there's no psychoactivity. I don't think even if you ate the jar of the cream, which wouldn't be very good anyways, you're not going to get high off it, but it's an incredible medicine. And that kind of product in a legal system, I think, will be sold in London Drugs and be widely available. Whether or not people like cannabis, that product, I think they would just use it because it works so well. But, and in a fully legal system, I really think we'd probably move away from smokable cannabis to other forms of using it, not necessarily through the law, but just because for most of European history, people use cannabis in tincture form. And although smoking can be really good medicine, there's a lot of other good ways of using it too, and prohibition really leads people to smoke their cannabis more, because if you buy a bud, you look at it, you can judge the potency and quality pretty good by looking at it. But a cookie or a tincture or a capsule, it could be anything, right? So if you're buying it on the street, you're going to want to buy something you can identify and use most efficiently, and smoking it's also the most efficient way to get a lot, or even vaporizing is even better. But in a legal system, I think people will tend towards tinctures and cookies and capsules and skin creams and those kind of things more. But they should all be available, certainly. Anyways, yeah.
Speaking of the legal system, how is Mark and when is he coming home?
Well, Mark's in a prison in Yazoo, Mississippi right now, and he should be home in summer of 2014. He's going to apply to come home sooner. He applied once before. The U.S. government turned him down. You have to give a 2-year wait before you can apply again. So he's applying right now. I'm not very optimistic he'll come home sooner. The U.S. government has to agree, and then Vic Taves has to agree. And I can't see both of those things happening in a timely fashion, right? I think but he's going to apply anyways, and he has to apply anyways, and why not, right? And we can protest and push, and you never know, miracles might happen. But all things being equal, as long as he gets his time off for good behavior, and so far he hasn't had any bad behavior problems or anything, so he should be out in the summer of 2014, just a few months before our historic vote to legalize cannabis in British Columbia. And but I'll tell you one thing about Mark's journey through the U.S. prison system has shown me is the difference between privatized prisons and government-run prisons. And although the government-run prisons are no cakewalk and no easy time or anything, it's much different than a privatized prison. And he first was in a prison in Georgia, and that was a privatized prison run by the Geo Group. But that prison was awful. They were locked down a great deal of the time, far more than they needed to be. No books in the library, no musical equipment in the music room, no chance for rehabilitation. Everything was busted and crappy. The food was terrible, and it was all about nickeling and diming prisoners to make little bits of money off them so that they could profit from that. And Mark was eventually complained about stuff and started getting attention, so they shipped him off to Yazoo, Mississippi, where he's actually in a medium security government prison. He only qualifies for minimum security, but he's fairly happy there. He's got his own cell. He's not double bunked like he was in the other one, where they cram everybody in to save money. And there's books in the library. They made him get his high school diploma. He dropped out of high school, so they have a program. The prisoners have to get a high school education, which is a good thing, all things considered. And it's just a better place to be in terms of they're not locked down all the time. Food's not amazing, but at least there's some food that you can eat. And you know, these privatized prisons are very dangerous, and this trend towards policing and imprisonment for profit is a very dangerous trend that is coming to Canada as well. And it manifests in many different ways. For police, it comes about seizing property and seizing homes and being able to keep those assets for the police force. And in the U.S., this is a very widespread phenomenon where police are empowered to keep the assets they seize. So who's got stuff? Murderers and rapists and arsonists don't have a lot of stuff, but marijuana growers and drug dealers do. So they focus their resources on those people so they can get their houses and cars and keep these assets. And in some American states, the state has said, well, this is a problem, so we're going to change it so all those assets that are taken go to the school system so the police don't have a motivation. And in those states, the federal government then comes in and says, hey, charge them under federal law, and we'll give you half of whatever you take. So there's a definite corruption of the policing system, and that's happening here in British Columbia. And you know, when the Liberal government says, oh, we can't do anything, it's federal laws, but when it comes to tightening the screws, oh, they're right there for that. And so it used to be, to take your property, they had to convict you of a crime, and then show that you bought your property with the assets of that crime, and then they could take your stuff. That was too hard. Then they said, we'll do it in civil court. We'll just sue you. And in a civil court, it's based on the balance of probabilities. So if you probably did something, that's good enough. In a criminal court, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a much higher standard of proof. So instead of charging you, they just sue you in civil court and take your assets that way. They're doing that to the Hells Angels with their clubhouse right now. Well, no one's going to shed too many tears for the Hells Angels, but that's who they start with because no one will shed tears for them, but they expand it to everybody else over time. It's always how it goes, right? And then the Liberals changed it after that, so that all they have, if it's less than $5,000, a police officer can take your assets with only a bureaucrat signing off on it. No judges involved. Then if you want to get that stuff back, you have to get a lawyer and go before a judge, which will almost invariably cost you more than $5,000 to do. So essentially, if a police officer thinks that you've got $3,000 in your wallet, you must be a drug dealer. No, it's my life savings. I was going to go buy doesn't matter. I'm taking it. You go to court, get it back. And so that's really a bad trend happening. And with the prisons, it's a very similar trend as well. The imprisonment for profit, forcing prisoners to work for very low wages, which are then confiscated by the warden as charged for room and board. And where prisoners are then competing with outside labor, and in many American states, the government mandates that they must buy certain things from prison labor. Most of their army stuff, uniforms, a lot of police uniforms and things are made by prisoners under mandate. You don't have to do it, but the warden who is hiring you is also the one who decides if you're good behavior or not. There's a lot of pressure to comply. And some of these prison companies like Geo Group are now going to American states that are cash-strapped, and they're going, we can run your prison system for you, we'll save you a ton of money. We just need you to contractually agree to a 90% occupancy rate for the next 10 years, and we'll run it for you great. And so now we're basing our imprisonment rates not on who actually deserves to be in jail, but on corporate profit, and that is a terrible trend. Geo Group has been lobbying the federal government in Canada. They say the Conservatives deny they want to privatize our prisons. I have trouble believing that. I think they'll start by privatizing the things around it, the food services, the cleaning, that kind of stuff, and expand towards that. And this new refugee bill that they put in place that allows increased imprisonment of refugees, I've been reading some things. It's recently happening, but I read some stuff about how that could be a backdoor towards privatized policing, because those prisons are a little different than some of the other prisons. But certainly this is a dangerous trend, policing and imprisonment for profit, and a lot of those prisoners are going to be there because of the war on cannabis and the broader war on drugs. Anyway, so Mark's doing pretty good. And he's learned how to play bass guitar, and he's performing with the prison band, and he's having fun doing that. And so he's writing a lot of letters and talking to a lot of people, and he was just interviewed on a radio station recently, but he's really getting bored and looking forward to coming home.
We'll be one home soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be great to have that vote a few months after he gets back. Did you have your hand up there?
Yeah, just a practical question. You want us to go out and work, do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the referendum, people actually have to physically sign a certain sheet of paper.
That's right.
So this advanced work, where we're getting addresses and names and so forth, and they sign, that's not on a legal piece of paper.
It's not, no.
So we have to do it sort of twice or something?
Yes, absolutely. Now, you may not have to get each person that you pre-registered again, yourself personally. What we'll do is, when you pre-register people and you sign up on our form, we get the form, we type it in, put it in our database.
Your system.
Yeah, we put it in our system. Only we have it. We don't share it with anybody else. That's just for us.
Yes.
And then we can also look and see, well, in this district we're doing really good. We've got everybody we need. Over here we're really low. We got to send some volunteers or make some phone calls, so that we have it all set up. And then when September comes, we will then be the people who are volunteering at that time, which may be you or maybe not be you, but we will then give you a list of people in your area from that database who have already agreed to sign. So that way we're all pre-set up. But if you register someone who lives far away who's visiting you, then when September comes, we'll get that local person in their area to go sign them up. So it doesn't matter where they are. You're not personally responsible for getting everyone to sign again.
Okay.
So, but hopefully you'll help out when the time comes for that. But it's a two-step process. So there you go.
I like that system.
Anybody else got anything they want to ask or say or add?
I'm a little curious as to Mark Emery being in a political party. How did that happen, that him being sent to jail? Like, is that not like Nelson Mandela or something? Isn't there like political parties?
Well, many people feel that way, and I don't think he deserves to be down in prison there either, and he's definitely a political prisoner. You know, when the DEA charged and arrested him, and they sent out a press release, they were charging him for sending marijuana seeds to the U.S. That press release did not use the word seeds once. It said, we're shutting down his propagandist magazine, Cannabis Culture, which I was quite proud of. It said that there's going to be one less pot of money for the legalizers to rely on. So it was clearly in their own press release. It didn't even say about marijuana seeds at all. It was all about his political activism. Later on, they were like, well, that didn't represent what we mean, and it's not about that at all. It's only about the cannabis seeds. But they really betrayed themselves in their own thing. But ultimately, he was looking at least a 10-year minimum sentence, probably longer. Could have easily gotten 20 or 30 years. They described him as their #1 drug dealer in Canada, more important to them than any Hells Angels and any cocaine smuggler. I mean, the whole war on drugs is a fraud, but clearly Mark Emery is not a person who's a big deal when it comes to drug trafficking or drug smuggling, right? But he was a political person, and that's why they went after him. And I agree that he's a political prisoner.
Democracy, like, really.
And they were only able to extradite him because they refused to charge him in Canada. Mark did get charged in the 90s several times for trafficking in bongs. He got convicted of promoting vaporizers. One time he gave a gram of hash to a guy who was visiting the Cannabis Cafe. This is in like the late 90s. Mark used to hang out at the Cannabis Cafe and give cannabis to people and just kind of be the prince of pot and do his thing. And this one guy came up, was a big fan, had his adult son with him, like son was in his 20s or whatever, right? And Mark gave them a gram of pot, and the guy was like, oh, I'm gonna, like, this is from Mark, I'm gonna keep this or whatever, right? My gram from Mark Emery. So he put it in his pocket, drove back across the border, got caught with this gram of pot. And they shook him down and pressured him. He said, Mark Emery gave it to me. So they actually paid to fly this guy back up to Vancouver, charged Mark with trafficking, made this guy testify against his hero, Mark Emery. Mark said the guy couldn't look at him in the courtroom. But I'm sure they put a lot of pressure on him. We're going to ruin your life if you don't testify. And Mark got convicted for trafficking a gram of marijuana and got like a $100 fine or some stupid, like the result of it was nothing, but they really wanted to like get him badly. And when they went to court for all these things, Mark would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars from all his bongs being vaporizers being taken and his place being trashed, his seed stock being taken. But at trial, and that the judges would give him a fine. It's not, they didn't consider this a big deal, selling bongs or selling cannabis seeds. So they gave up. The prosecutors in Vancouver said, stop busting him. It just creates a lot of hassle. It's costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars in police time, and everybody hates us, and he just goes back to business the next day. So one cop, Ian Thurber, went down to the U.S. and told the American cops, and they also already had some growers who they'd found with Cannabis Culture Magazine and a bunch of seed strains circled out of Mark's catalog. And so they got together, Americans came up and charged Mark here. And people even tried to go to court and charge Mark themselves, like we're going to charge citizen's arrest or whatever for exporting marijuana seeds, because if he was charged for exporting, they couldn't. But that all fell through. They never charged him in Canada, and so we really outsourced our justice system to the U.S. I think they should have charged him in Canada. He was breaking the law, charged him with exporting marijuana seeds, and see what. But he would not have gotten a 5-year sentence. He would have gotten. He had a long list of priors. He might have gotten a month in jail or maybe a big fine or something. And that's not cool. But that's way more appropriate under the Canadian system to charge him under our laws and let him face our laws than to just bypass our legal system and send him down to the U.S. But RCMP love that. They'll say openly, we prefer that Canadians get charged under American law. If you're exporting to the U.S. or smuggling, they always charge you on the American side because their laws are better. And they'll say that quite openly. We prefer that. But can you imagine a cop saying, I'd rather people get charged in Amsterdam because the penalties are a lot less, and so we try to make sure that people are charged under Dutch law. Like, people would laugh, right? But get them charged under U.S. law. I think they should. RCMP should enforce Canadian law for Canadians, and that's not really not what happened with Mark Emery.
I just wanted you to clarify a little bit. I've been online and there's a lot of people bashing the Sensible BC campaign. They're saying that this is kind of ruining the legalization campaign that has been going on for the past 20 or 30 years. And I'm sure you know of the guy, John Chavlik. And he's saying that this will not work. And so I was just wondering if you can clarify on how this can work compared to their legalization.
Well, John Chavlik has a very personal vendetta against me and doesn't like me for some misunderstandings that happened about 10 years ago, which I'm not going to get into, but nevertheless, he's a very persistent fellow, absolutely. But I would say this doesn't distract from anything else. But if they want to lobby Stephen Harper to change the marijuana laws, go right ahead. I don't think you're going to have a lot of success. If they want to wait until the Liberals come in or the NDP comes in and then lobby them to change the marijuana laws, they'll have more success probably. But I really don't, even though they're both talking about it, I have trouble thinking that they're actually going to legalize cannabis right away all across the country. And us having a referendum in BC to decriminalize cannabis possession will only make it easier for the Prime Minister to then legalize it across the country. How is that going to make it harder for them if we voted to decriminalize and change the laws and actually to legalize, really? We call it decriminalize cannabis because that's the first step in what we're doing. We can't fully legalize as a province, but the goal, as I've explained, is to create a legally regulated system in BC, which I know will spread across the country. So I don't think there's any contradiction between supporting this campaign and also lobbying the federal Liberals and NDP and the Green Party and whoever else, right? The Bloc Québécois should be pushed at it too, But I mean, I don't see any conflict between those things. I think it all reinforces each other.
Well, with legalizing, you can still go to jail, though. Decriminalizing means no punishment. But legalizing, if you're not really playing by the rules, that as what's legal, you can still find yourself going to jail. Well,
I mean, under our proposed decrim, it's only about possession. The other things stay in place. I think there's got to be some kind of rules around legal cannabis. At least at first, there's going to be certain rules. And I'll say, although we don't specify the model we're looking at, I like the wine model for legal cannabis. I like the idea of the way we regulate wine. If you want to set up a winery in your own home or make some wine for yourself and your friends, you can do that. There's a limit on how much you can make, but beyond that, there's not really any taxes or special regulations. You can share that wine with your friends. You can use it for yourself. That's all cool. If you want to go to a U-brew place, you can have someone else help you with it, and you can produce your own wine for yourself there. Anyone can open a winery. There isn't only 5 government-run wineries. There isn't any kind of monopoly. Anybody can start a winery, but you got to have the good product. You got to be able to compete. You got to have something that's out there. The government's the primary buyer and seller of wine. They're not the only one, but they're the main source of buying and selling it through liquor stores. The same bottle of wine can cost you almost nothing if you make it in your own home. It can cost you more if you buy it in a liquor store. It can cost you even more in a fancy restaurant after dinner. I like that kind of cannabis model. People should be able to grow their own cannabis. To start with, there should be some kind of limit, a number of plants, or better yet, a number of square feet or square meters per household. If you make it by number of plants, people will tend to grow really large plants. It makes more sense to me to define it by a square foot, but whatever. People should be able to grow a certain limited amount. That limit can change and grow over time, I would say, especially as we ease things in, but we start with a somewhat small limit for personal use. And then people should be able to get someone else to help them grow it. They should be able to buy it in a store. They should be able to get it for medical use if they need. They should be able to have a nice joint after dinner in a fancy restaurant. That's cannabis, or use a vaporizer perhaps in a restaurant after dinner or something like that. All those options should be available, and the cost and the tax rate would be different at each point, right? But that's the kind of model that I'm working towards and what I'd like to see put in place in BC. And like I said, this is ultimately provincial jurisdiction. Even if the federal government legalizes marijuana, it's not going to set all the rules. It's not jurisdictionally allowed to. Each province will have to decide what they want to do. So why not get a head start in BC and figure out what we're going to do, so when they do it, we can have this.
Okay. You talked about basically lobbying all parties, and I couldn't agree more. But you've also talked about your association with the NDP. I'm wondering, is there something about the NDP's drug policy that you find particularly encouraging, or is your partisan stance sort of separate from this entire issue?
They're separate. I mean, I talk about, I'm an NDP member, I ran for the leadership, I'm certainly affiliated with the party, but I don't want people to feel that they have to be an NDP member to join this campaign at all. Many Green Party, Liberal, I got Conservatives coming out to our event. This is absolutely a non-partisan campaign. If the provincial NDP would just pass this law, I wouldn't have to have a referendum, right? So even though I'm part of the party and I'm pushing from the inside to make that happen, it's not like the NDP is formally behind all this and they're going to do it. Like, we've got to lobby them as much as anybody else. That being said, the federal NDP has had very good cannabis and drug policies for a long time. They've stood up for it quite a bit. Libby Davies, who's their drug policy critic, has worked over the last 20 or 30 years, I guess 20 years or so, to promote changing the cannabis laws. When the Liberals were in power, they were talking about decrim. The NDP was there trying to make sure they did it properly, trying to make people able to grow their own plants, that kind of stuff. Before he became leader of the party, Thomas Mulcair made some unfortunate comments about cannabis that have come to haunt him. But I will say that after he became leader, he issued clarification on only one issue. It's the only thing after he became leader that he said, let me clarify what I said before I ran. And he talked about cannabis. And he released it on April 20th of this year. And he put out a statement that he supported decrim, that the party supported this. And I know what happened is that they had a caucus meeting, and the caucus said, you said the wrong thing, Tom. You didn't go with party policy. Our people are calling us. You've got to fix this. And so there's a broad support within the NDP. But the Liberals, federal Liberals, have also passed a wonderful marijuana policy. They waited till after they were out of power and unable to do anything before they passed it. But nevertheless, the federal Liberal Party uses the word legalization in their policy. The federal NDP calls for decriminalization, but they always specify they mean real decriminalization. They want there to be no fines for possession, no ticketing. They've always pushed for like eliminating or the smallest penalties possible, or to eliminate penalties, and not to have a decrim where you get a $500 ticket or something like that. So, but like I said, I'm certainly, in this issue, I am nonpartisan. I welcome anybody from any party, and yeah, I want people to feel comfortable. But I just talk about the NDP because that's who I am. I don't want to pretend that I'm not who I am, right? So there you go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything they want to ask?
So
Yeah.
Cultivation as yet is not part of.
Because we can't set rules and limits, we would only been able to tell the police, ignore all cultivation in BC. And while some of us might like that, probably that wouldn't fly. It would create a system of people would be growing too many plants. We tried to set a limit. If you're growing 6 plants or less or whatever, that's allowed. But we were told that was outside of provincial jurisdiction to create that kind of a regulatory system. Because I would have preferred that if we could have added in that you can grow 6 plants, that would have been great. And in fact, that's what I like about Colorado and not so much in Washington. In Washington, they've decriminalized or legalized possession of an ounce, which is great. And they're going to set up government-run stores to buy it, which is also good. But they should also allow people to grow their own. And in Colorado, they allowed possession of an ounce and cultivation of up to 6 plants in your own home. And they put it in their constitution. The average person is not going to bother growing their own marijuana if they can buy a quality, reasonably priced product at a place. But it'll keep the price down. If people can grow their own, the more expensive it gets in the mainstream, the more likely you're going to start, okay, I'm going to grow my own now. If it costs too much, people are going to go towards home cultivation. But if the price is reasonable and the quality is good, then the average person is not going to bother growing their own cannabis.
But
I think it should be allowed. I'm all for that.
What made me ask about it, you did mention it apparently in 2014, even if you have a license?
That's where they want to
Not even
go.
one plant, you go to jail, mandatory.
Well, no, the mandatory minimums are 6 plants or more.
For
Now,
now.
for now, yeah, and they haven't said they're going to change that in 2014.
Oh, they
That doesn't mean that 1 to 5 plants is legal, though. It just means that the law on 1 to 5 plants didn't change. You don't have to go to jail for at least 6 months for 1 plant, but it's still against the law. You still get charged for it. You can still go to prison. And by the government saying 6 or more plants is 6 months in prison, it's a signal to judges that 5 plants is still considered serious. We will see sentences for smaller amounts of plants also go up, even though the law didn't change those, because it sets a tone from Ottawa that this is a serious offense, to be treated in a serious way. But yeah, in 2014, their intent is to eliminate home cultivation for medical
Up
users.
the licenses and then make that illegal.
And so if I was someone who got my license, I'd be quite upset. I worked hard to learn how to grow marijuana. I invested in lights and equipment, maybe lost my first couple of crops learning how to grow. Finally, I'm able to grow some quality medicinal grade product for myself. Then the government says, oh, you can't do that anymore. Throw all that away. And oh, by the way, you're on a list here that we have of all the growers. And so that's very difficult for a lot of people. That being said, there's going to be immediate court challenges, I'm sure, against these new rules to fight that. Hopefully we can take it out. I'll get to one more thing I want to say, is that the main problem I see with the Health Canada system, and there's many, but one of the big ones is that designated growers can only grow for 2 patients at a time. It used to be only 1. It was a 1-to-1 ratio. We went to court and fought that, and the judges said, you're right, that's a ridiculous rule. We're striking out that. So the government said, okay, 2. You can grow for 2 patients at a time. It's very difficult to make a living or any kind of profit growing cannabis for 2 people. It's not going to work. But if you were able to grow for 100 patients, it would solve so many problems. Municipalities don't like people growing small amounts of cannabis in their own home. And so that should be allowed. But if someone could grow for 100 patients at a time, they're going to do that in a warehouse or a greenhouse or a big space. And that would get the price down. It would enable people to find good growers to work with. The quality would increase, and it would create a much safer, better system for everyone. But they have that crazy limit on it. And so many patients that I know can't find a grower, and they find one who rips them off. Some of them have good deals, some of them don't. But I know a lot of patients who have been ripped off by their growers, had their cannabis stolen, had bad things happen. So that would be a great way to fix the program. Yeah, go ahead.
Has anybody brought up the therapeutic qualities of growing your own plants?
Well, I would agree. That's excellent medicine, being in a garden and working with plants. I know a lot of people who got into other plants because they started growing cannabis, and they were like, this is actually quite nice. I'm going to grow some tomatoes too. And so absolutely, I would say, and even just being around the air and everything can be quite beneficial. So there's a good therapy in there, and using your hands and learning and all that kind of stuff. But I know so many people who learn so much about plants from growing cannabis. I'll take you and then over there, yeah?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people with a government license, and I actually got Hep C from the Red Cross, and I can't believe they want to take my license away, so I want to start a class action lawsuit for everybody who's got an MR license, because I think we should really come up with a really cool t-shirt for everybody to support this campaign, and anything else.
Do you know John Conroy, the lawyer, because he's working on doing some kind of class action lawsuit like that, and he's been trying to find patients who are willing to participate in that?
John Conroy?
Yeah, he lives out in Abbotsford, but he's practices in Vancouver mostly. He's been around a long time and done a lot of stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, check him out, John Conroy. I think johnconroy.com, I think, is his website. But if you type in John Conroy lawyer, he'll come up. And yeah, he's working on that, and so I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about something like that.
Okay, thank you.
What you want to get, I can grow prime vegetables for very low cost.
I think in a fully legally reintegrated thing, the best cannabis shouldn't cost more than the best tomatoes or the best lettuce or anything. But that also being said, you know, if the government were to legalize cannabis and have it available for $3 a gram in cannabis shops, people would be happy because the price is a lot lower. But still, $3 a gram for tomatoes is still very expensive. So there's still plenty of room to have quite significant tax revenue. And any legal system has to compete with what we have now. So we already have a robust cannabis industry. If the government sells you pot for $20 a gram, that's half the potency, no one's going to want it, right? The price has got to be equal or lower. The quality's got to be equal or better. And I certainly don't want the government growing cannabis. They don't brew alcohol. They don't grow tobacco. The government should not be involved in growing cannabis. That would be, I think, a bad way to go.
Anybody who doesn't smoke pot can't grow it anyways. It's a given. If you don't smoke it, you can't grow it.
That may be, I don't know. But anybody else got any questions or anything? I think we were going to end around 3, were we not? And we're getting close to 3. I think that was the timing. I've done a lot of stops, so I'm not sure. But thanks everybody for coming. I'll be here after if you want to chat with me a little more. Please grab some forms from the back, take some sign-up sheets, get your friends and family to register. Go to sensiblebc.ca, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. But the best stuff to post on Facebook and Twitter is things you actually did in the real world to sign up people to our campaign. We can do this together. This is an amazing turnout today. I want to really thank you all for coming. So I'm here afterwards if you want to chat with me a little more, but I feel very inspired by the turnout here today, and we're going to make this happen. So thanks for working with me to make this happen. Excellent.
Dana, I could email to my friends in Dawson Creek and have them go to your database.
Absolutely.